There is an Israeli lobby group called the Institute for Curriculum Services, and what they do is they lobby to make changes to the history textbooks in American public schools. And the changes they make hide Israeli war crimes, 75 years of tyranny, and the dispossession of the Palestinians. They also demonize Muslims, Arabs in general, and erase the Palestinian national identity. So your kids, especially if they go to school in the state of Virginia, are not only being taught a revision of history that hides the absolute horrific war crimes and human rights violations that Israel's consistently perpetrated over 75 years, but they're also actively teaching your child to be a racist and an Islamophobe. This is not conjecture. They lobbied to enter a picture into the textbooks in Virginia that had an Israeli and an Arab playing Twister. Well, the Arab was wearing a bomb vest. Okay, and it was a picture. It was a drawing, I'm sorry. They're trying to get drawings of, that's how they cast Palestinians, wearing bomb vests. When Palestinians are just, literally, we're resisting Israeli terrorism, okay? Palestinians are counter-terrorists. The entirety of Israel was taken through the use of terror. Okay, but this revision of history is really disgusting. My buddy Wally Rashid actually has an organization that tries to make corrections to these textbooks. I'm going to tag him in this. I'm sorry, Wally, I forgot the name of your organization.
Talked about how a Zionist organization, the Institute for Curriculum Services, is lobbying history textbook companies in the United States to remove any words related to Palestine and only teach children K through 12 about Israel. For example, changes they've previously made, referencing Palestine only as mandatory Palestine or Palestinians, nor as a state or identifiable territory, even though 136 members of the UN recognize the state of Palestine, removing any words related to settlers or colonialism, even recommending a cartoon of a Palestinian wearing a bomb belt. I talked about how we need to fight back, and one of you guys DM'd me and recommended I look into an organization called Teach Palestine. So I did, and I actually had a meeting today with the organizers of the Teach Palestine project, Judy and Samaya. First off, they're amazing, and second, I was actually mind blown learning about just how bad this situation is. Separate from Zionist organizations lobbying history textbook companies, they are actually going to individual school districts to make sure any ethnic studies course does not teach about Palestine. If they do, these Zionist organizations, including the ADL, will go to these school board meetings and say that the courses are anti-Semitic. Even say the phrase Free Palestine in of itself is anti-Semitic. Give me a lot of resources, and we're going to continue to collaborate to see how we can combat this.
Here's the pro-Israel lobby group that's working to change our public schools and textbooks. It's called the Institute for Curriculum Services, a nonprofit organization whose stated goal is improving the accuracy of K-12 instruction and instructional material on Jews, Judaism, and Jewish history. But if you look a little deeper, it's obvious that one of its central goals is pushing pro-Israel narratives. ICS shapes school curricula in America either by recommending changes to existing curricula or creating its own. Their website says that they operate in all 50 states, and in 2018, they bragged that they were responsible for 11,500 changes in textbooks throughout America. Several teachers in New York City schools sent Breakthrough News photos showing that ICS resources are being used to teach about the genocide, and that teachers themselves are also being subjected to ICS curricula targeted at teachers. Teachers in New York City are protesting the use of ICS curricula, as well as the repression they're facing for speaking out against the genocide, which we'll get to later. In the name of balance, ICS works to edit out any historical context that would lead someone to see Israel as a colonial aggressor. For example, ICS curriculum eliminates the words settlers, occupation, land theft, and wall with disputed, captured territories, security fence, and control. In this paragraph from a textbook about the 1967 war, ICS proposes taking out any reference to Israel occupying Palestinian land, saying that these are loaded terms. Instead, they offer up a new sentence which says, later Israel annexed East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. Israel then allowed the building of homes and communities in some of these areas, which the Palestinians opposed. What's missing here is any mention of the fact that nearly the entire world condemns this move in numerous UN resolutions. While they neutralize any language about Israeli violence, ICS also selectively adds context to make Palestinians look violent. For example, ICS sent a letter to the Department of Education insisting that after mentioning Yasser Arafat, he be described as, quote, directing countless terrorist attacks, but then also requests that Ariel Sharon, who oversaw the Sabra and Shatila massacre and the murder of thousands of Palestinians during the Second Intifada not be described as a hawk because, quote, the usage of hawk is confusing since the only definition of the term appears in a previous chapter where it's applied to people who supported the U.S. military intervention in the Vietnam War. One of the most ridiculous examples is ICS's request to remove a photo of an Israeli soldier holding a gun at a checkpoint. The comment argues that photos presented to students should only show positive examples of both Israeli and Palestinian nationalism. This comment is interesting because, one, you literally can't find photos of Israeli soldiers at checkpoints without a gun because they all carry them. And two, here's an actual political cartoon that the ICS suggested be used in textbooks in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It says, Roadmap to Peace, and shows two guys representing Israel and Palestine playing a game of Twister with the man who's presumably Palestinian sitting there with a bomb strapped to his chest. Besides the obvious fact that the whole positive nationalism rule clearly only applies to Israelis for the ICS, it also begs the question, what's the real obstacle to peace? The occupation in all of its genocidal brutality or the armed resistance to it? But the greatest distortion of the ICS is that it denies the existence of Palestinian identity entirely. In its 80-slide curriculum, teaching the history of Arab-Israeli conflict using primary sources, there's not one explanation or even reference to what Palestine is or what being Palestinian means in the modern context. ICS repeatedly insists that, quote, there's no state of Palestine, nor has there ever been one, and therefore opts in the framing of an Arab-Israeli conflict. Every mention of Palestinians qualifies them as Palestinian Arabs, pushing the Israeli narrative that all Arabs are basically interchangeable, that Palestinians are just an extension of a larger Arab hatred of Jews, and that Palestinians have no unique tie to the land of Palestine, that they could move to any other Arab country and it would be no different for them. For its stated mission of appreciating Jewish history, you'd think they'd include some documents of anti-Zionist Jews, which was a big trend in the early 20th century. But no, the curriculum only provides documents that talk about the Zionist movement's aspirations from Europe to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And there isn't a single reference to the writings of people who already lived in Palestine. Instead, the curriculum cites a number of documents about Arab nationalism in the broader region and Arab opposition to the Ottoman Empire. While Arab nationalism is definitely relevant to the question of Palestine, to leave out the historic record of Palestinians living in Palestine, which is the very basis of Palestinian identity and claim to the land, and replace it with the aspirations of Arabs in Syria or the Arabian Peninsula to be free from Ottoman colonialism, it's obvious what they're trying to do here. The curriculum also tries to falsely construct the narrative that the Zionist movement had received written promises to the land of Palestine. The curriculum cites the Balfour Declaration, the document where the British expressed their support for a Jewish state in Palestine. Of course, the British Empire had simply seized Palestine from the Ottoman Empire. It was never theirs to give away. But the curriculum also heavily leans on the Faisal-Weizmann Agreement, the document where Faisal, the Emir of Mecca, seemingly agrees with Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann to help create a Jewish state in Palestine. There are a number of issues here. Faisal was the son of the king of Hijaz, a short-lived kingdom in modern Saudi Arabia. His father was used as an agent of the British, and neither he nor Faisal actually lived in Palestine. The idea that one man could override the will of millions of Palestinians who were against the Jewish state in Palestine is itself dubious. Second, Faisal couldn't even read the agreement because it was written in English. The agreement was almost immediately broken and is largely considered nothing more than a piece of propaganda. There are primary sources like the King Crane Commission which show widespread opposition to a Jewish state in Palestine, but students taking this course wouldn't know this. Why? Not just because it's not mentioned in the ICS curriculum, but also because the ICS insists that students not be allowed to use the internet to learn about Palestine, but that they should instead only use the Anti-Defamation League and Jewish Virtual Library as outside sources. The curriculum doesn't even mention the military occupation of the West Bank or the total blockade of Gaza. In fact, the only mention of the conditions in Gaza are in the glossary, where the curriculum says that Gaza is, quote, one of the poorest and most densely populated places in the world, without mentioning why Gaza is so poor or densely populated. Since October 7th, pro-Israel groups have increasingly demanded more control over historical education related to the Middle East, and this has corresponded with mass repression against teachers. But the teachers are getting fed up. Recently, a group of New York City teachers called New York City Educators for Palestine spoke out publicly for the first time demanding New York City Chancellor David Banks end the harassment and double standards being levied against teachers who speak out against the genocide.